So I'm a futurist. And there are a lot of really interesting things about being a futurist, but for me, one of the most fascinating parts of my job is whenever I meet new people, people that I've never met before at, cocktail parties or TEDx events, things like that. And the conversation is always interesting because you get to that point. What do you do? Well, I'm a futurist. And there are all these interesting responses. Mainly what I hear is, that's a job? Really? They pay you to do that? Whatever that is? But as the conversation progresses, there's always one person in the group that asks this question. Where's your crystal ball, dude? And, it's always a little snarky because they're kind of making fun of the fact that I'm a futurist because even they don't know what that may or may not be. And I always respond with some sort of lame answer like, well, it's out being tuned up or it's, being dusted off or something like that. But what's really interesting to me when I reflect on these questions are two things. First, I think it really reveals how uncomfortable we are to think about where we're headed, to think about the future. Because it's something we really don't understand and we don't know how to know it. And so we really don't want to talk about it too much. But the second thing, the thing that really relates to me, is that most people don't understand what it means when I say, I'm a futurist. They think that somehow I'm going to tell them what's going to happen in the future, that I'm going to predict tomorrow. But you can't do that, because the future hasn't happened yet, and we don't really know how it will happen. What my job is to help people better understand how to think about the future, better see what might be possible in the future, so that they can create the future that is best for them. And I totally believe that we have that power, and I think that's the thing that's really important. So the question is, how do we begin to do that? What tools do you need in order to be able to create the future you desire? And of course, the first thing you have to understand is, well, where does the future come from? What makes change? How do we get there from here today? And since the first caveman picked up the first rock and threw it at a brontosaurus, or whatever it was they were throwing rocks at back then, we have always known that technology shapes our future. Every time something new is introduced, it will reshape who we are as a culture, and it will actually create a new future for us. And many people think that that's the only driving force. But I would suggest that there's a second one that is equally, if not more important, and that is the stories that we tell ourselves about the future. The visions, the dreams, the ideas, the things that we believe are possible actually have an incredible positive or negative impact on what does become possible. They will change the future. Now, how does that work? Well, basically what it is it gives you a way to look forward over the horizon, to look into that unknown, that world that you can't see today, and to begin to think about where you might actually end up. So in other words, the idea is you're creating a mental map. Now I have to pause for a moment because I notice most of the audience is fairly young. And this is what you think of when I say map, right? And today's maps are really interesting. You can see them anywhere, and you can see incredible detail in them. You know exactly where you're going to go, if Google Maps works, which is what, about 50% of the time? And you actually can just see the fronts of buildings and things like that. That's not the kind of map I'm talking about. I'm talking about a map more like this one. This is from the 1200s or something like that, and these maps are incredibly interesting to me because their detail, is almost non-existent. You know sort of where you are. You know the kind of maybe the next village over, but you don't know much beyond that. And the people who created these maps used them to explore most of the known planet. Think about that for a minute. A map that basically says, get in the boat, go out this way. After you get about a few miles away from coast, there are going to be sea monsters. After that, we really don't know what happens, but if you go far enough, we're pretty sure you'll fall off the end of the earth. Yet people took those maps and were able to circumnavigate the entire planet. They settled entire new civilizations based on those maps. That's how incredibly powerful a map of the future can be. And the important thing is to understand, it's not about the detail, getting the detail right. It's about getting the vision right. It's about understanding where you really want to be with that map. So what I want to do is take a couple of minutes here and give you some sort of illustrations of how I think that has worked in the past and talk about how you might be able to use it today. So we're going to go back in our time machines for a moment, about 100 years. I know this is going to seem like thousands of years to most of you. To the early 1900s, a time when the sort of prevailing story about the future was great, big, beautiful tomorrows. It was a time when everything was going to be fabulous. Technology was going to create an exciting new world, and everybody was going to have everything. And that's really not too surprising when you think about the technologies of the time. Think about for a minute that in 1920, the majority of people on the planet had never seen an electric light bulb. Electricity was one of the most amazingly transformative technologies to come along since fire. Really, what could you do today if you didn't have electricity? And then there were all those other things like, oh, I don't know, the automobile that you could go almost anywhere, the airplane which could fly you around the world, and we were building buildings that literally were touching the heavens. So it's not surprising that at that time, most people's vision of the future was one where technology was going to be the savior. Technology, not us, technology was going to create a new world that was going to be filled with science and all of this incredible power, and it was just going to be a fabulous world in the future, and we weren't going to have to do much about it. Sort of the height of this enthusiasm comes from something called Futurama in the 1939 World's Fair. No, it's not a cartoon, although I do know that it is today. Futurama was an incredible exhibit that millions of people went to see that included all these fascinating future things like, oh, I don't know, interstate highways, living in the suburbs, and of course everybody's personal flying car. So this technology story actually worked in a lot of ways. It was responsible for creating a lot of the things that we live with today in terms of the positives that came out of that time. But there was one minor problem. If you made technology God, you ignored the fact that sometimes technology had some negative side effects. And so it was around the middle of the last century that those side effects became obvious to more and more people. And when that happened, we started to change our narrative about the future. For the first time in modern times, we really began to question, is there any future? Will we have it tomorrow? Or will we actually destroy ourselves? Now, that doesn't mean that technology changed. But what it does mean is that it changed our orientation and changed the kinds of things we thought about. And instead of having grand plans to build buildings that were going to go all the way to the moon or actually send men to the moon, we began to scale back. We began to look internally, and we began to change what we believed was possible in the future. And that sort of slowed down the idea of really grand projects happening. Now, the third example I'm going to talk about is today. Because technology always continues to move, no matter what we believe, one way or the other. And of course, the main technology influencer of our modern time is the computer chip. And it has so radically changed us in many ways, ways probably more powerful than most of the other technologies I've talked about here today. And the basic change is, it has changed us and turned us into digital human beings. And the thing about being a digital human being is that we have access to all sorts of really interesting technologies, but psychologically, for the last 20 years, we really haven't understood how to deal with that. And as a result, our attitude is, we don't have time to think about tomorrow. The best I can do is think about, when am I going to get that next text message or that email? When am I going to, get that next level in that video game that I'm playing? We have become rooted in what many researchers call a sense of presentism. The idea is that I don't have the capacity to think about change in the future because it's happening so fast, there's no way I can keep up anyway. And of all of these different grand narratives, this one is the one that I think actually is the most dangerous. Because this is the one where we totally give up our control over creating the future. I just don't have the capacity. I can't keep up. And that's a really dangerous thing for us as a society, and in fact for all of humanity. So what I want to do is suggest to close here is a different way to think about that. A way that we can actually begin to create new stories about the future. Stories about tomorrows that are filled with opportunities. And in this new version, I don't want to talk about the fact that we're going to give everything over to technology. We found out that didn't work. But I don't want to give up on being in control of technology instead. What I want to do is suggest that what you do is look at the new things that are out there. Look at the technologies out there. Tweak just a little bit your attitude toward them, and you'll find that you can actually create some interesting visions. I have time to give you one example. This is, of course, the majority image that we see everywhere today, right? And if you're a certain generation, mine, you look at that and you go, oh my God, the world is just coming to an end. What's wrong with these kids? They spend all of their time staring at their screens, they're punching buttons. We are alone together. We don't connect anymore. I actually suggest that story is based in our fear of technology. I see something completely different. I see a device that gives us access to all of the knowledge and information, and more importantly, people in the entire world. How many times have you been out with a group of people and somebody's asked a question, and before you had a chance to even think about it, somebody else has found the answer for you? How much information do you get through your connections? I think it's an incredible opportunity. And the more important part about it is that an opportunity that is probably one of the most egalitarian one that has ever been created in technology. People in countries that don't have electricity, or didn't have electricity even 20 years ago, have cell phones today. The people suggest that something like 70 or 80% of all the humans in this world have access to a mobile device. That's incredible, because that means voices that we would never have heard are actually out there. It means that you have the ability to collaborate and cooperate with people that you will never meet, but may have really incredibly interesting ideas. And so what happens when you start to think about using the technology in that way? Well, a few million people in the Middle East a couple of years ago used it to start a revolution. You know, Arab Spring was driven by the technology that was available to them through mobile devices. They were able to connect and demand equality and justice and override a government because they had the ability to communicate with each other. That's just one of the kind of examples that I think is really interesting to think about. And so what I want you to suggest to you is that as you think about where you're going, think about a world of connections. Think about what's possible when you connect with people all over the world with all sorts of abilities in real time and what you might actually be able to do. The map that creates for me is one that's really, really exciting. I actually think that I don't have any idea what's on the outer fringes of that, but I am really thrilled to think that there's a possibility that we might actually go there one day. So I'm a futurist. And if you ask me where are we headed, I'll tell you honestly, I don't know. What I do know is that where we end up is in your hands. And I hope that your dreams and visions for tomorrow are wild and wacky and incredibly, incredibly over the top. Because if you have them, then I think the world will be a better place. Thank you.